Hello there. This is Nancy Love live from California for the Planet Peace Project. Now, let's talk about the difference between excuses and reasons again. And I am making this video today because I was recently basically insulted by someone who watched one of my previous videos and said that she um, thought I was lacking in compassion for abuse victims. Not at all. What I'm lacking in compassion for is people who use having been abused in the past as reasons to become abusive in the present. I have no ability to fathom why someone could say that they are abusing cats and dogs or shooting their husband or things like that because in the past they were abused. Now I'm making a distinction between the battered spouse defense and people who just go around and chronically abusive to their spouses. Spouse abuse is one of the most insidious problems. It has cost lives, it has cost marriages, it has cost society so much, and it costs individuals beyond practically anything that I could compare it to. Spouse abuse is one of the most massively disruptive things. It's a form of malignancy, it's a form of indecency, it is unholy. It occurs between people of all genders and proclivities. It includes people who are not legally married. And in point of fact, I've also talked to people who were abused by siblings or other relatives. So, familial abuse or any kind of domestic violence that occurs um, is a horrible thing. And I will not be misinterpreted. I have been battling domestic violence for decades. And I don't care who watches my video for how long. She apparently got upset that she thought I was not being compassionate enough for battered spouses. There's not one human being on the face of this planet who could be more concerned about or compassionate toward battered spouses. The difference, between me and some people is that I know that it happens in all kinds of different relationships between, and sometimes uh, the female is the primary abuser, sometimes the male is the primary abuser, sometimes they're homosexual relationships with, it's just not a question that I need to be having to address, but here it goes. What I was trying to explain to this person who probably cut the video off before she listened to the rest of the communication was that being abused is not a reason for becoming abusive. The difference between the battered spouse defense legally, when someone acts out and finally, usually finally after sometimes years of abuse, defends themselves, their pets, their children, their property, their other extra local family or friends, is that that is a one time action that is a form of, it's a desperate attempt to protect oneself, one's pets, one's children, one's family, one's friends, or one's property. It has over and over in the courts been overwhelmingly approved of as a legitimate defense for an action that otherwise would be considered illegal. But yes, I absolutely do approve of the legal definition and the legal use of the battered spouse defense when people have taken that one time action to defend themselves against the specific individual who is abusing them. That is completely different from what I was talking about when I said that I don't um, think it's justifiable to claim that having been abused in the past is is a reason for being abusive now. When I say abusive now, I mean if someone says that when she was 5 years old, her mommy was abusive, She doesn't get to hurt your pets and claim that that's a reason that she hurts innocent animals now. If some guy says his dad beat him when he was a child, that's not a reason for him to, become a thief or a criminal or a rapist or someone who goes around assaulting people in barroom brawls. Your parents may have hurt you. Your siblings may have hurt you. Some other member of your family may have hurt you when you were young. That is absolutely no excuse for becoming an abuser. The victims, the cats, the dogs, the horses, the parrots, the ferrets, the children, the spouses, the friends, the people you're abusing now, if you're making that excuse, are not the perpetrators of the abuse against you. You're you've become what you hate. Somebody told me years ago, a very wise man said, Nancy, it sounds like you're a good person and you're constantly doing battle with evil, but don't become the devil in your fight against the devil. Well, don't become an abuser in your fight against abuse. And I get so tired of being misinterpreted by people who lack the listening skills to understand that they need to listen to the whole communication and not part of it before they make an assumption about me or anything I have to say. Because these tutorials, the micropeace tutorials from the Planet Peace Project, have been a long time coming, but I hope well worth the wait because they have helped a lot of people. Please subscribe to my channel. I have a lot more downloads than I have subscribers. Hundreds of people are looking at my videos, not just the 22 subscribers I've got or so. So subscribe, help me out. I've never monetized my channel because at this point YouTube says two things. On the one hand, you have to have 1,000 recent subscribers within the last 12 months and 4,000 video viewing hours among those subscribers or other, non-subscribers. And it also just recently, I don't know if a lot of you, in order to monetize the video, when you do monetize the video, it's about 2 cents a view. So you have to have a lot of views when you finally do get monetized to make any funding off of YouTube videos. This is all for free. This is me just trying to help people for free, and I hope it works. But YouTube also sent out email to all people with channels recently that stated that at any time that they decide to arbitrarily, they can monetize your channel without your permission and whether or not you have established a channel that meets those two criteria for monetization for yourself. So YouTube can monetize any channel they want, but in order for you to actually have an account that is monetized, it has to meet those two criteria previously mentioned. Now, um, in all honesty, I think the battered sibling defense ought to be used because I know people whose whole lives have been affected by siblings who physically assaulted them or sexually assaulted them and so forth when they were young, and it's as bad as parental abuse. I do have compassion, and what I see is that, um, oh yeah, and the battered pet defense. I think that there should be a legal defense, and it probably has been decided, and there's probably some legal precedent in some courts, and made by some judges in the United States of America that somebody who chronically abuses your pets uh, is somebody that you can retaliate against because there are those of us who love our pets more than we love the sun and the moon and the entire sky. There are those of us who love our pets more than we love our own lives. And so, for me, and for a lot of the people in animal rescue and animal advocacy that I know, for somebody to abuse our pets is worse than for them to come after us. I have compassion for people who've been abused. Make it absolutely abundantly clear in your own mind that I do. And I don't ever want to be accused again of not having compassion for abuse victims. But listen up, abuse victims tend to fall along two different basic lines: those who become abusive and those who refuse to become abusive. What's the difference? It's called the hardy personality. This has been determined for many years, and it's been studied. I first studied the concept of hardy personality in the 60s and 70s, and it's a very well documented thing that a lot of people have written some wonderful books about. But people who survive abuse and become wonderful people with a lot of self restraint and compassion and love for folks and do not become abusive tend to have certain personality characteristics, including the ability to take responsibility for their own behavior. That's called an internal locus of control rather than an external locus of control. People with an external locus of control are always blaming other people for their own behavior, no matter what, and that's silly and it's immature and it's wrong. Um, but we have so many criteria that we've noticed that people who survive abuse and do not become abusive as a result of that past uh, exhibit. One also is having good role models during childhood. Your parents, siblings, whatever, may be abusing you, but you might have that one really good teacher at school, or you might have an aunt or uncle or a neighbor who serves as a shining example of the way people ought to be. And if a young person, is smart enough and coherent enough, in spite of being abused, to see that that person or those people are adequate role models when your own parents or whoever is abusing you is not, then you have a great gift. They tend to be capable of reaching out for help. They tend to have a lot of really admirable characteristics, but all of these characteristics can be developed. They're not inherent, they're not genetic, they're actually personality characteristics that can be learned. There are social and coping skills, intrapersonal within the person and interpersonal between people, coping skills that can be learned and must be learned if you're going to escape a life of abuse and not become an abuser as well. Get help, develop self restraint. Some people will look at things like religion. Uh, if the religion that you grew up in didn't foster uh, these these characteristics, then look to other religions. There's secular philosophies. There's a lot of really good work done in the field of ethics. But philosophers for literally centuries have been writing, literally millennia have been writing about ethics. And you can learn how to be an ethical person without being a religious person. So go for it. If that's your thing, go for it. Be a secular or humanist or whatever, but for God's sake, don't become an abuser. Don't use being abused as an excuse for being an abuser. But here again, let me make that distinction. If you've been abused for a long time and you see someone coming after your children or your pets or your other family members or friends or even property, uh, then you do have, as far as I can tell, a legal right to, and you should have a legal right to defend yourself and those you love who are vulnerable and dependent on you. So here we have, very quickly, three individuals who became abusive as a result of being abused and are chronically using being an abuse victim as an excuse. I have talked to someone who said his father was very abusive and made him commit crimes early on. And made him do things like get tattoos early on. They were very rough and tumble. His father was an ex-convict when he was raising the child, and the person when I knew him was in his 50s, had become one of the roughest, most dangerous people. He'd been in and out of prison already for manslaughter, and he was involved, yeah, in a human trafficking ring. This guy was using the fact that his father, decades before, had abused him as a reason for drugging, raping, trafficking other human beings, beating other people. He was a violent, drug addicted drug dealer. And all of that he blamed on his dad for behavior that occurred decades before. And I counseled him into maturity and philosophy. And he said he got the light, he saw wisdom, he had this incredible transformation. His wife said she hardly recognized him anymore. And he actually got religion of some sort as a direct result, he said, of knowing me and my proselytizing for the cause of self restraint and self responsibility. And I'm really proud of that. Go for it. Good on you. And he finally realized that in his mid 50s he could stop finally using the fact that he had been horribly abused as a child as a reason or as an excuse for being a hardened criminal as an adult. None of the people he victimized were responsible for what he went through as a child, but he perpetrated horrifying, horrifying abuse on other people. So he got over it. He got well last time I spoke to him, and I hope that transformation has stuck and stayed because he sure needed it. There was a person I knew who was abused by his mother as a child, and I knew him when he was in his 60s. He had written a book on the matter. It was a very, it was a book that went on about all kinds of things, but it was extremely negative. There was nothing hopeful, optimistic, or inspiring about it. He was a person who was vulgar, depressed, emotionally violent. I don't know if he was physically violent, but he was always criticizing, and he was very combative. And virtually every word, every sentence out of his mouth contained curse words. And he was known as a vulgar, pessimistic person that most people wanted very, very much to avoid. And he blamed his behavior, I kid you not, he blamed his behavior in his 60s on the fact that he'd been abused as a child, and his mother was long since dead, and he had in fact become relatively wealthy, or at least comfortable, when he inherited a lot of money from her. But instead of moving beyond that and learning skills that would allow him to become more optimistic, less depressed, less combative, you know, he just stuck and stayed in that mire, that miasma of abuse victim, and used his horrible past, his treacherous past, as a reason for current treachery. And I don't accept that. Sorry, someone just went by who really, really needs a muffler. Now we have someone else. I knew a woman who says that she was abused as a child. And if she's stating the truth about even one event she told me about, it's pretty much beyond my imagining. I can barely imagine what it would have been like to be her. But she is one of many. She is one of so many people. And I knew her back when she was in her 50s. And people, she was using the fact that she had been abused as a child as a reason for harming animals. Now, what cat or dog that's alive in the 21st century is responsible for the fact that she was abused back in the 1960s or 1970s? This woman was taking injured animals into veterinarians and claiming that she found, she just had such poor luck, such bad luck all the time. She was bringing in animals who had been horribly tormented and abused to veterinarians and wanting them to patch them up, always claiming that she just was this hapless victim and kept finding these tormented, injured animals when in point of fact she was the one injuring them, and then getting some little bit of, I don't know, guilt or whatever, and trying to get them repaired. Why? So she could go back and injure them all over again? She shot someone. She shot her own dog one day because she was nervous or angry at someone else. She kills little bitty cats and dogs now who had nothing whatsoever to do with her being abused when she was a child. And I'm crying because I cry for the animals. I cry for the animals that woman has harmed, all in the name of her poor past abuse. So whoever criticized me recently and said, oh, I don't have compassion for the battered spouse defense, of course I do. But this woman is not, committing a one-time act which would ordinarily be considered criminal, but which should be legally excused because she's a battered spouse. She is committing repeated, horrifying abuse against completely innocent animals because she was abused half a century ago. And I'm going to say it, get over it. If you can't get psychological counseling to figure out why you hurt a cat because your mommy hurt you decades ago, if you can't figure out how to become a decent person in half a century of trying, apparently not trying very hard in her case, then I have no use for that. I have no compassion for that. I have no sympathy for that. And she's using being an abused person as an excuse for abusing completely innocent animals now. And it's got to stop. And it's going to stop. Because I'm going to help every law enforcement agency I can find to put that woman in jail. I am going to help get justice for the animals she's harmed, because there is utterly and absolutely no excuse for hurting a cat or dog because your mommy hurt you half a century ago. Grow up and show up with some maturity, self-respect, self-restraint, and what's called dignity. I knew, and incidentally, the woman is a drug addict, a drug dealer, an alcoholic, and she said, I think she was on at least 7 different chemicals, some of which are legally prescribed for her by doctors who don't understand that she's remarketing and redistributing her illegal drugs that she gets from the legal pharmaceuticals. No. I have been called Christ in a skirt. I have been called the Buddha of compassion. Some of my Jewish friends call me one of the 36 righteous ones. I have been called one of the most nurturing, compassionate, empathic, tolerant, forgiving, loving people on this world. One lady who known me for 30 years said I was the most Christ-like person she'd ever known. And I've received a lot of A's on a lot of tests, and I've received a lot of awards in a lot of academic realms, but I had never received a greater compliment or award or honor than her telling me I was the most Christ-like person she'd ever known. But there comes a time when even Christ gets angry. There's this whole concept in Buddhism called the angry Buddha. And it says the angry Buddha is seldom seen. Most images of the Buddha are him smiling and he's happy or laughing. No, there is such a thing as an angry Buddha. And the source of anger in Christ or Buddha or any great philosopher or anyone who's loving and compassionate and kind inherently or by choice is injustice. And when you hurt a cat, or you hurt a dog, or you hurt a horse, and you expect me to be sorry for you and go, oh, boo hoo. No, not gonna happen. I have no patience for somebody that says they were abused, therefore they have become abusive, and you're supposed to, deal with it. No. I knew another guy who said that he was a foreigner. He got to this country. He was not from around here, and he was bullied as a child. He didn't look like everyone else. He didn't speak like everyone else, and children bullied him. He actively acknowledges that he is a bully. The guy's in his 30s now. He is a bully. He's a vicious criminal bully. And he goes around, he's huge, he's overbearing, he's mean-spirited, he's a liar, he's a criminal 16 different ways. And this guy who's, he looks like an adult, he acts more like a toddler than any adult I've ever known. This guy has the emotional coping skills of a toddler and expects you to understand that you're being bullied in the 21st century because sometime in the late 20th century, when he was a child, he was bullied when he got to America. Get over it. Grow up, show up with some actual self-respect, and take responsibility for the behavior that you're exhibiting now, because none of the people that person is bullying now are in any way whatsoever responsible for the fact that he was bullied as a child. In fact, I wish I had known him when he was a child. We're very, very different ages. I'm twice his age, and I have like 16 times the level of maturity that he has. But when I was a child, we actually made up a word for it, xenophilia. Xenophobia is the fear of the unknown. And xenophobia is why a lot of people fear immigrants to their country. They don't look the same, they don't speak the same, the culture's different, the religion may be different. So xenophobia is a word, Xeno, for fear of the foreign. And it has a lot to do with racial prejudice and so forth. But when I was a kid, my teachers and friends and I made up a word for the way I behaved toward the new kid in the class, xenophilia. I tended to love the foreign. If some kid just got here from Korea, I grew up in Texas, and if some kid just got here from out of the country or out of town, instead of being cliquish, instead of shutting the new child out, I was the kid who went over and put my arm around the person and brought them into the crowd. I befriended the foreign. And I wish to God, I wish I could give this person who's now such a horrible bully one great gift. I wish somehow I could manipulate time and go back into his childhood and be his friend. Because if that kid had just had one person who went around, grabbed him, said, come here, and brought him into the crowd, made him included, then maybe he wouldn't be abusing people now, lying to people now, be a criminal in more ways than I can personally even count. This guy sexually assaults people. He's involved in human trafficking and drug dealing. And he blames the fact that people who aren't around now bullied him 30 years ago. Not going to happen. Not an excuse. Not a reason. No. He's a child. And the level of immaturity that I have exhibited in that one person makes me so outraged. I'm so tired of people who have an external locus of control, and they've never done the work. They've never studied anything like Buddhism or Christianity or William Blake or Soren Kierkegaard or William Kant. They've never studied philosophy. They've never studied ethics. They've never studied any kind of religious or spiritual training, even though some of them purport to be Buddhists or Christians or whatever. No, you don't get away with that. Them's fighting words. None of the people abuse victims are hurting are responsible for the fact that they were once abused. But here again, I will point out that's entirely different from the battered spouse defense. People have a right to protect themselves from chronic abuse. People have a right to defend their pets. People have a right to defend their children. And I think that's hardwired into the physiology. I think that parents have a genetic imperative to protect their children. So you tell me some chronically battered woman uh, protected her children from their own father through violence, I'll say good on her. It's about time someone protected those children from their own father, whatever means that person had to use. A good mother is a good mother, after all, and a good father, a good father. Some people, are step parents and they protect their children and they don't have that genetic imperative, but they have a love imperative instead. Good on them. Children must be protected from abuse. And just because you were abused as a child doesn't mean you have an excuse. Very quickly, I will point out that some of the best people I've ever known were abused as children. I had the unique privilege and honor of observing a woman parenting her child in San Antonio years ago. I didn't know her well, I haven't seen her since, but I had a few occasions during the course of business interactions and a developing friendship that we had there to see how she treated her children. And they would be wild and they'd ask her questions and they'd tear stuff apart, and I could tell she was sometimes at her wits' end, but she would stop and there'd be this long pause, and I could tell she was conflicted because she wanted to yell at them or, bark orders at them or tell them they were being bad or whatever. And she would say the most balanced, loving, kind things. I even asked her, are you being so nice to your children because I'm here, or do you always treat them that way? And she said that she always treated them that way. And I said, you must have had some of the greatest parenting because you learned such wonderful parenting skills. And I could see she got angry. The look on her face was one of revulsion. And she said, "Don't give them any credit. You're giving attribution for my parenting skills to the wrong person." She said she was responsible. She was entirely responsible for the fact that she had become a good parent. She revealed to me on that day that she had been horribly abused as a child, psychologically, physically. And she said, "Nancy, I'm a good parent because my parents weren't good parents, not because they were. So credit me for being a good parent, because if I had followed in their footsteps, I would have nothing but blame and shame, because I'd be a bad parent the way they were. I'd be abusing my children rather than being a paragon, as you say, of self control and compassion and kindness and self restraint." There was another situation where I'm trying to find another. Yeah, there's a man I know, met him recently, and he's very balanced and self-controlled. He's like knowing his Zen master, and he's a humble person of humble means, and um, he's one of the best people I know. He has such immense self-control and beauty that you can practically see it radiating off him like sparks. And he's a father. His children, I believe, are now adults, but he's a very, very balanced, good, caring father, although he and the mother of his children have divorced. And when I've asked him about how he got to be the way he is, he does acknowledge that he was abused as a child. But the way he got to be the way he is now is through the study of martial arts. So he used things like jujitsu and karate and taekwondo to learn centering and self mastery. There's an old statement, um, lo, I know that I am king, for I have learned to master myself. If you can rule yourself, you are truly royal. And so this person achieved mastery through the mastering of martial arts. There's another person I know whose mother was somebody who basically shrieked for 12 days at a time and then passed out for a couple of days and woke up and kind of like the Terminator just reared up and started shrieking again. The person was what's called unipolar. Everybody's familiar with bipolar disorder, but this person was based. It's possible to be unipolar. It's possible to be manic all the time or depressed all the time. That's called unipolar disorder. So this person, the lady I'm talking about, had a mother who was unipolar manic, and that's hard because the person talks all the time. A unipolar manic person is the sort of person who is frequently mistaken for someone with schizophrenia because they will just shriek at people who aren't even there when they're alone. They will talk constantly. They're real jittery. They can hardly ever be still. And they basically talk. If they're awake, they're talking, and it's almost all invective. It's what I call spewage. Spewage is spewing sewage out of your mouth. Spewage. And this lady I know, I've known her for many decades. Really, uh, became one of the most balanced, loving, kind, compassionate, nurturing, Christ-like people. Buddha in a skirt, Buddha of compassion type of people. Not because she had good parenting, but precisely because she didn't. And if you ask her about it, she'll tell you that she learned early uh, on one clarion call day when she was only 4 years old. 4 years old, this woman said that she learned on one day when her mother was being, totally crazy, and she was alone there with her mother and frightened of her mother, that her mother was the exact opposite of a role model. And she said she remembers backing away with her hands up in a self defense posture and said, I will never be like you. I'm she said, Mama, I'm gonna decide right now that I'm gonna be the exact opposite of you because I hear there's something called a role model and you're not it. And then she said, may I have your permission to go in the backyard? And she was given permission just to get away from a truly insane human being that she should have never been left alone with to begin with. My dear friend triumphed that day and chose to become what she, the best person she could become, and made that decision when she was very small. And I think that deserves a lot of credit. So I've said what I've come to say, and I hope that somebody will see this, and I hope especially that the person who criticized me, because she probably didn't listen to my other video long enough to understand that I wasn't being lacking in compassion for people who have to use the battered spouse defense. What I'm saying is that you don't hurt a cat and expect me to have compassion for your abusive behavior because your mommy made you do it, you don't become anybody that hurts anybody now and blame it on the distant past when you were a child. No, you grow up, you show up, you develop your dignity, you develop your integrity, you get the self restraint skills, you develop an internal rather than an external locus of control, and you don't become the devil in your fight against the devil. You become something a lot more sublime. Well, I'm done. Ciao for now.